guys, welcome to Better Bachelor. This is Joker with a face for radio and a voice for print. You know, you must be a fan. You must be a big fan of my channel to click on this thumbnail because it seems like this is not a normal story that I would put on a kind of a channel that is for men's advice. And you might say, well, this is kind of weird. What a weird thumbnail. Let's see what Joker has to say. Well, this is a great and interesting story, and I think it's something that comes to point out the wage gap that is currently in many different jobs. So when they talk about the wage gap and women making 77 cents for every dollar of men, what they did is they basically took all the jobs that men work and their earnings, and they divided the amount of money brought in by all the men, divided by the men. Then they went to all the women working, and they took all the income that they make and divided it by the women. And they found that men make 23% more. Now, if I took 10 lawyers and I took 10 ditch diggers and I took the money that the lawyers brought in and divided it up, and I took the money that the ditch diggers brought in and divided it up, at the end you'd say, wow, there's a wage gap between lawyers and ditch diggers. Why? Well, because lawyers get paid more. Why? Well, they're doing different work. So when we look at lower wage jobs for women, we look at some of them, some women and men are both, food service and things like that. But there are a lot of women that have lesser paying jobs where men, for example, if I don't have a great education and I don't have a whole lot of options to me, I can become, I'll tell you what a friend of mine did as a good example. He didn't have any degrees, and he didn't really have any trades that he was good with, but he started working for, I forget the company. I want to say it was either a TV company or it was some sort of company that he had to climb up. If you ever see the towers that are super tall that have the blinkers on them at night, well, those blinkers are an LED bulb or some sort. He has to hook himself up to a rig and climb, 1,500 feet up in the air to change a light bulb and to sometimes fix things on towers. He got paid $60,000 or $70,000 a year to do this, yet he had zero skill. Why? Because it's exceptionally dangerous and it's kind of nerve-wracking to do that work. So if you were to take someone, say, that is a nanny or someone that is a housekeeper, and you took her salary, uneducated, same levels of everything, no education, no this, no that, and then you took his salary, you'd say, this is not fair. He gets paid twice what she does. But they're not taking into account the work that is done and the pay that is required to do it. If you do more hazardous work and you do something that is in not nearly as easy a job to fill, it doesn't matter necessarily your work skill level. It matters if you'll actually do the job or not. So how this relates to the U.S. Soccer's women's team is pretty interesting, and it's quite simple. So why this ruling actually got thrown out by the judge. It didn't even make it to a trial. And I'm going to read through it, and you'll find out why. But this is a good argument when people say, hey, the salaries are different. Well, men work more overtime. Men work extended shifts. Men take night shifts. Men work other jobs that women won't. So when you just do all the dividing and all that stuff, no, it's not going to come out to be the same. And I wanted to put this out there for you so when you do inevitably hear an argument about the pay gap, you understand why this is. But if they actually drilled down and they took, for example, female doctors as an example, and they did the same for male doctors, they found that women actually made about 1.5% more. And you can fact check me on this. I didn't pull up an article, but Google or web search some of these stories, and there's one that actually Google, the employer, did an internal audit, and they found they were paying the women more than the men doing the same job. So I wanted to give you guys this information so that if you are hit with this, you have something to talk about to kind of defend yourself. And so this is kind of important. So the U.S. women's soccer team equal pay demands are dismissed by a judge. The players' claims about unequal working conditions can continue, but the ruling was a serious blow to a years-long campaign by the women. The judge in the United States women's soccer team equal pay lawsuit rejected the players' most important claims on Friday, delivering a crushing blow to the team's 4-year legal campaign against the United States Soccer Federation. The judge, R. Gary Klausner of United States District Court for the Central District of California, accepted the Federation's argument in what's called a motion for summary judgment. In his ruling, he dismissed the players' arguments that they were systematically underpaid by U.S. Soccer in comparison with the men's national team. In fact, Klausner wrote, U.S. Soccer has substantiated its argument that the women's team actually earned more on both cumulative and an average per game basis than the men's team during the years at issue in the lawsuit. The players, through a spokeswoman, said they would appeal the decision. U.S. Soccer, in a brief statement, appeared to take little pleasure in what was a significant, though most likely unpopular, victory. We look forward to working with the women's national team to chart a positive path to grow the game both here at home and around the world, the statement said. U.S. Soccer has long been a world leader for the women's game on and off the field, and we are committed to continuing that work to ensure our women's national remains the best in the world and sets the standard for women's soccer. So let me put this in here. Let me put this in here in a way that is understandable for even non-soccer lovers. And I have to call it soccer. I know 50% of you are overseas watching this and you call it football, but hey, I'm an American. If I say football, Americans get confused. So we're just going to call it soccer. Let's say you have a sport that brings in billions of dollars because everybody watches TV, watches it when it's on, and you can charge your advertisers more. Let's use a sport and something that's easy to understand for everyone, like soccer. So the men are watched a lot more. They have a larger audience, and the revenues from advertising can be much higher. As such, they get a lot more money and can pay the men more based on what they bring in. Now take a sport that isn't watched as much and can't charge the same revenue because if I say, hey, I charge a penny per view on my video or 2 pennies per view on my videos to sponsor an ad on my page. If I say 2 pennies per view and you say, okay, I have 100,000 views on this video, multiply it out, that's $2,000. Now, if I say, hey, I charge 2 cents a view and multiply it out, but I only get 20,000 views, that's $400. So obviously I get paid more when you get more viewers. The same thing happens here in soccer. So women's soccer, yes, they hit a highlight when the women's team won, but they weren't able to charge more for the advertising because it's not a long-running time that people were really tuning in to check out the women. It was only during a very short period of time when the women actually won. So what this means is they're bringing in a lot less advertising for the women than the men, but when you divide up what they did bring in, the percentage the women were getting paid was more. Let me flip it over here. I don't think there's anything more really I need to read down through on this one, but let's flip over here. Yes, there is a soccer pay gap. The women make more than the men do. Oops. Shocking. Last year, the Men's World Cup generated $6 billion in revenue and gave about 7% to the teams. That's actually really sad that the stars get 7% of it. But they have advertising, they've got overhead, they've got all this other stuff, but still, 7% to the ones that actually make all this possible is kind of sad. The 2019 Women's World Cup made $131 million and gave out more than 20% to the teams. So as a percent of revenue, women actually made more than the men, 13% more to be exact. Shortly before the Women's World Cup finals kicked off, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer gave a shout-out to the U.S. soccer team. Schumer took it upon himself to complain about how much less the female players get paid in numeric terms than their male counterparts. The women make just as much of a sacrifice, put in just as much mental and physical energy, absorb just as much risk of injury as the men who play for our national team, Schumer said. Yet when you break it down, women's national soccer team player earns a base salary of $3,600 per game, while a men's player earns $5,000. Impassioned Schumer continued, discrimination is staring us all in the face. These women who inspire our country with their poise, tenacity, skill, and excellence every time they take the field deserve to be fairly compensated. Wow. Virtue signal much? This is virtue signaling 101. You can tell I haven't read this article. In the United States, especially in politics, expressions of moral outrage play a prominent role. This sort of feigned righteousness is clearly intended to make the speaker appear morally superior. Schumer's exaggerated feelings of outrage are clearly strategic. It's a reasonable ask whenever someone is expressing indignation. He's genuinely outraged, or is he just virtue signaling? Schumer is clearly signaling. Now that the women have returned from France, triumphant and heroic, the calls for equal pay have never been as loud. Shortly after Schumer's performative plea, Jennifer Benderi, writer for the Huffington Post, also decided to weigh in. Female soccer players earn a much smaller bonus in the World Cup, $15,000, than male players, $55,000. And here's a stark comparison. The U.S. Soccer Federation awarded the men's team $5.4 million bonus after losing in round 16 of the 2014 World Cup. It awarded the women's team $1.7 million when it won the entire tournament in 2015. Irrelevant. It's not about winning or losing. It's about advertising. It's about how much money you bring in. Now, I'm going to phrase this, and I'm not saying that men are better than women, even though 14-year-olds did beat the women's team, the championship team, even though 14-year-old boys beat them. Not the point of this video. But the point is, if I am a master, if I am a nobody, but I can pick up a hammer and nail in wood, pretty much like I've done on my bus, and you've got a master carpenter, that master carpenter can extract a lot more money for his skills versus me. Why? Because he's in more of demand. Simple supply and demand. But if everybody in the world was a master carpenter and you needed something fixed on your house and you were a master carpenter and you said, I don't feel like master carpentering today, and you hired someone, they'd be cheap because everybody's a master carpenter, but he wants the work. Same thing goes here with the women. The women have much, again, look at the top of this. Let me mark where I am here on the page. Look at the top of this. They brought in $6 billion. The women's brought in $131 million. Now, a billion is 1,000 million. Let's rephrase this. The men's cup brought in 6,000 million. The women's brought in 131 million. So why is there a pay disparity? Because there's an income disparity. If the women were paid the same rate as the men, women's soccer would go bankrupt. They don't have the money to pay them because they don't bring in as much money. It has nothing to do with the gender. It has to do with how many people watch and how many people how much they can charge for the advertising. They continue on. Clearly incensed, the writer goes on to discuss an incident where 5 prominent members of the team filed a complaint with the Equal Opportunity Commission. The women allege that U.S. Soccer Federation was sexist. Hence the reason for the pay disparity. In 2017, they signed a new collective bargaining agreement. Although the deal resulted in additional pay, it clearly wasn't good enough. 3 months ago on International Women's Day, as Broderie notes, 28 members of the team filed a lawsuit accusing U.S. Soccer of institutionalized discrimination, a violation of both the Equal Pay Act and the Civil Rights Act. It looks like they're heading to trial next year. In March of this year, Los Angeles Times published a stinging op-ed that said the women's soccer team outperforms the men when it comes to victories, domestic viewership, name recognition, and general awesomeness. Right. Its members are stars, constantly ranked number 1 in the world, and they make millions of dollars for their employer. Now, he says here, let's see, what's the wording he uses? They're stars, ranked number 1 in the world, and they outperform the men when it comes to victories and viewership. Okay, that's here in the United States, sure. Let's talk worldwide, where the U.S. men's soccer team competes against other people that bring in a lot more money. See, again, you're cherry-picking your data to try to find that small subset of things that support your argument. But that's not going to work when it comes to everything. I'm not going to go continue reading down this because they start getting into a bunch of numbers and all that stuff. I will leave the links down below for both stories. But you get the point, is that you have to step back. Did you know how many male models make the same amount as women supermodels? Why aren't there any men supermodels? It's because they're not in demand. They're not in demand like women supermodels are. Do you know how much men make compared to women in modeling? I do not. But if you're curious and want to look it up, please do. You're wasting your time, however, because the women probably make 100 times more than the men. There are millionaire and hundreds of millionaire. Gisele Bündchen. Is she the one that's... Now, I'm not sure. Is Gisele Bündchen the one that's married to Tom Brady? I think it is. Gisele bunch in net worth. There we go. Oh, 400 million. I don't know too many models, male models, that are millionaires even, 1 million or 2 million. Male model income. Let's see. Oh, here's the top annual income estimated for a male model, 1.5 million. Boy, that sounds a little different than 100 or 400 million, doesn't it? And even if you say, yeah, but that's per year versus her entire income, well, she's been a model for what, 15 years? Divide that by 400 million. That's 10 times more than 1.5 million at least. You get my point. The whole thing is here that it's supply and demand. Men's soccer, high demand. They get high income for the advertising. Women's low. So this will go back to court. It sounds that they're going to file it again, but I'd say the story's dead. We know where this is going to go. They're not going to make any more money. And if for some reason the judge did say, hey, you know what? You have to give the same dollar amount. 6,000 million, 6 billion versus 131 million. Women's soccer's done. They'll bankrupt themselves and they'll be out of it, and that's over because you cannot force them to pay more than they make. It just doesn't happen. The other story I was talking about, and let me see if I can give you at least a good search term. 14-year-olds beat women soccer team. 15-year-olds, there it is. Yeah, just type in 15-year-old beat women's soccer team, and it'll say FC Dallas under 15 boys squad beat the U.S. women's soccer team, national team, in a scrimmage 5-2. Now, I'm not harshing on the women but to say, hey, we deserve equal, where we play just as hard and do as much sacrifice. If you want to see a better skilled team, just go watch some 15-year-old boys from FC Dallas under 15 team, and you're going to see play that is superior to the women's team. And again, it is what it is. You know, you can call me being a jerk about that, but you can't demand the same salary when the advertising dollars just aren't there. Guys, if you'd like to support my work, links are below. Thank you for all of those that have done so directly. I super appreciate it. And the best way you can support my work is like, comment, share, subscribe.